Chapter 5 of Isaiah. In verses 8 through verse 23, Isaiah gives an enumeration of their sins, deals with things like their covetousness, their greed, which would be punished by a famine, their drinking and revelry, their presumption in sinning, and excusing of their sins, even by challenging God, saying that He's not going to do anything about it. He can't do anything about it. He won't destroy them. Then in verse 20, we saw their lack of morals, where they ended up calling good evil and evil good. Which brings us down to verse 21, which we're going to start with this evening. And by the way, in this section, there are 6 woes that Isaiah sets forth. Verse 21 is the 5th one, and verse 22 is the 6th. But here in verse 21, woe unto them that are wise in their own eyes and prudent in their own sight. This woe deals with their being arrogant. They're wise in their own eyes, prudent in their own sight. They think they are great. Look how great we are, basically. Look how much we know. And the implication that he is setting forth is the idea that the people are saying, we know better than the prophet of God, and we even know better than God Himself. All of these things are so contemporary, it's, I'd say, almost scary. How much do we hear about the explosion of knowledge that has taken place in our lifetime? There has been, haven't there? So much so that we are wise in our own eyes. We know everything, don't we? Everything that we need to know. Until we don't know it, isn't it? The Humanist Manifesto that was first written in 1933, I believe that was the date. The second one was written in 1973, if I remember right. Both of them set forth what humanism is all about. And humanism basically says we are our own gods. We don't need a God. Now then, to tell you the influence, how many recognize the name of John Dewey? Dewey. John Dewey, for those who already know, had the most influence on modern day education in America than any other person, probably. He was one of the signers of that Humanist Manifesto number 1. Now then, it doesn't take much to start seeing the connection as to what's happened in our school systems when you go back to the one who's had so much influence on them and what he was. Someplace in my files I have both of those manifestos, and the second one's basically just a revision and a rewording of the first one. But both of them claim we don't need God. We are our own God. And even to the point that thinking of an afterlife and a heaven or a hell becomes detrimental to society. They're wise in their own thinking. Anytime you get into the aspect of philosophy, philosophy very simply means the love of wisdom. But when you're looking at it from the science of philosophy, what you're looking at is the best ways in which to live, a moral code of ethic. And philosophy tries to exclude God. In fact, Thomas Warren had a debate with no, not flu. Every time I almost say barnyard. It's Barnhart. Now then, you'll probably, every time you think of it, think of barnyard, because that's really what he basically, in excluding God, that's what you make everyone. But it was on a system of ethic. It was dealing with philosophy. And Barnhart was saying that this system of philosophy of basically it is an idea of selfishness and do your own thing was better than any system that God of theology. And that's what the debate was dealing with in reality. But philosophy basically says we can make our own way. We are so wise and so knowledgeable today that we don't need God, that we can set forth a system of ethics as to how to live, that we don't need any direction from a supreme being. Now then, Warren did use that in his debate with Flew and also with Mattson, those three debates. But the one with Barnhart was specifically dealing with the aspect of philosophy. Dale?
That attitude has permeated the citizens of this country has a lot probably to do with homegrown Americans joining Islam and engaging in terrorism against their own country now, because of the permeating attitude drawn from public schools, from viewing people like that, bombarding their minds from
I would not say that would be a reason for that, no. I would not think so. But Americans basically have become arrogant, and or as this puts it, wise in their own eyes, prudent in their own sight. Notice the emphasis, though, it's their own sight, it's their own eyes. It's not God's ways, it's their own ways. And that's what our society has become today. Someone turn over to Proverbs 26 and read verse 12. Proverbs 26 and verse 12.
Seest thou a man wise in his own conceit? There is more hope of a fool than of him.
I think that sums it up real well. A man wise in his own conceit, there's more hope for a fool or of a fool than of him. When we become wise in our own eyes, in our own conceit, as it's put there by Solomon, to where we think that we don't need God and don't need direction, then anything is allowed. And that's why you see people doing what they end up doing today in our society. the crime and the evil that is seen in our society comes from the basic idea, it doesn't matter what I do. The only thing they have to worry about is the law.
They put it, get the real gusto out of life.
Yeah, get everything out of life that you can. It is a very, well, it is totally this world. It's all that there is. Turn over to 1 Corinthians, the 1st chapter. And look at starting in verse 19. Where God is saying, "For I will destroy the wisdom of the wise, and bring nothing the understanding of the prudent. Where is the wise? Where is the scribe? Where is the disputer of this world? Hath not God made foolish the wisdom of this world? For after that, in the wisdom of God, the world by wisdom knew not God. It pleased God by the foolishness of preaching to save them that believe." We could go on. Notice verse 25. "Because the foolishness of God is wiser than men, and the weakness of God is stronger than men." Verse 27, "God hath chosen the foolish things of the world to confound the wise. God hath chosen the weak things of the world to confound the things that are mighty. And base things of the world, and things which are despised, hath God chosen, yea, things which are not, to bring to naught things that are." Why? Look at verse 30, or verse 29, "that no flesh should glory in his presence." Now then, look at our society and what it says. Just like that Humanist Manifesto, we have no need of God. Man is God. That's humanism in its very basic form. Man is God. Don't confuse, by the way, humanism with being humanitarian. That's been done in the past by some that you're saying, are you saying that we should not be humanitarian to people? Well, no, that's two different things. Humanism is a philosophy that says basically man's God. Humanitarianism deals with being humane to others, dealing with them in kindness and helping them out, being generous to them, charitable. So that's humanitarianism. Humanism, though, elevates man to God status. But basically, as Paul puts it here, man has gloried in the presence of God, saying we don't need God. We become God. Now then, understand Paul's writing in 1 Corinthians 1, and you go into also chapter 2. He's showing that man thinks he can control his own way or show his own way, and he can't. Instead, the only way that we can have to God, and thus true living, is through the revelation of God. And that's the latter part of chapter 2. And look at chapter 2 and verse 5 and 6. "That your faith should not stand in the wisdom of men, but in the power of God." He's making contrast. Here's the wisdom of man. Here's the wisdom of God. Wisdom of man, nothing. And so he says, "Howbeit we speak wisdom among them are perfect, yet not the wisdom of this world." nor the princes of this world that come to naught. Instead, he says, we speak the wisdom of God. And man on his own, and this is verse 9, as it is written, eye hath not seen, nor ear heard, nor neither hath entered into the heart of man the things which God hath prepared for them that love him. That's dealing with God's revelation to man as to how man is to live and thus come to God. It's not talking about heaven, by the way. And that's seen in verse 10, but God hath revealed. See, talking about revelation of God. God hath revealed them unto us. And he's done so, the us there being the apostles, he's done so by the Spirit. Well, man has become, though, arrogant, his thinking that he has the right, he knows the way in which we should live and act and everything that we should do. So here is a woe placed upon those who are arrogant. In verses 22 and 23 then, we have the sixth woe. Woe unto them that are wise in their own eyes and prudent in their own sight, or woe unto them that are mighty to drink wine, and men of strength to mingle strong drink, which justify the wicked for reward and take away the righteousness of the righteous from him. So here's this sixth woe, and it basically returns to the second woe that's found in verse 11. There we're told, woe unto them that rise up early in the morning, that they may follow strong drink, that continue until night, till wine inflame them. Well, now then, you look at this one, mighty to drink wine, men of strength to mingle strong drink. So here again, he's returning to that same idea of drinking alcohol. I wonder why he returns to that thought. He's placed a woe upon them in verse 11. Now then he places another woe upon them in verse 22.
I think it's because that had a lot of impact on Derek Parker and them carousing with Baal and Asherah and all the surrounding nations in their idolatry.
I think the basic reason is because of the danger of alcoholism and what it does to the sensibilities of man. That's how evil it is. That's the first thing that alcohol attacks is the inhibitions. It depresses that moral sensitivity of the mind. That's the very first thing it affects. That's why people talk about having a good time. Why? Because their moral sensitivities have been depressed by the alcohol. And that's why people will do things under alcohol that they would not normally do, because of what alcohol affects. So yes, it is that aspect. And some have where it's men of strength to mingle strong drink, or mighty to do one. They have heroes instead of that, or mighty in war or building and planning. The idea, though, is that they are mighty in drinking. They're not heroes in drinking. They're mighty in drinking. They're not mighty in warfare. They're not mighty in building and planning. What these people are doing, they're mighty in getting drunk. Carl?
What do you see when they come down here on their spring break?
Well, that is, and because of all of talking about spring break in particular, and the colleges, kids coming to Florida, that's why they got kicked out of one place, got kicked out of another place, and they keep finding different places because of all of the alcoholism and drunkenness and the revelry that goes on and is associated with them. Yeah. and that's the way a lot of people are. It's almost like I've got to go home and get a drink. How many? Well, we talk. So many of the places of business have happy hour. Well, what is that? That's a time that you can go and drink alcohol at a reduced rate. Why? Because you're on your way home and you've had a hard day at work, and so you've got to relax some.
Why do you think they give free liquor in Las Vegas?
I would ask, how do you know that? It's on TV. Las Vegas gives you a lot of free things in order to get you to gamble there. So they know where they make their money, put it that way. But here, these people are mighty in drinking alcohol. And in verse 23, it's connected with verse 22 from the standpoint, because of all of this alcohol and this drinking, the judges, instead of making decisions upon what is right, what do? They take money from the wealthy in order to rule in their favor. Their senses have become dulled by the alcohol, and so they can't make right decisions.
Yeah, when I first read it, that's the way I took it, was it was talking about strong men or mighty men. I was looking at it as people who were in power, that were like judges or governors, and then the second part, see, because these people that they're in power, and then they're under the influence of alcohol, they'll take bribes and they'll do people wrong, effectively they judge or rule.
And that is the case. It is, here's these men who are in power, who they're strong in drinking, but then in verse 23, those same men, because of their position, then start ruling unjustly and for reward. In watching some shows dealing with trauma and such, it was interesting that doctors are not allowed to take gifts in that type of a situation. If you try to give them a gift, they cannot accept it. Why? Because they do not want gifts to start clouding the issue as to, I'm going to give special favors to this person because he's going to give me something. And so they prevent that. Congressmen, they are allowed to accept something, but they have to report anything that they're given. Not sure that all of them do, but the principle is, again, you cannot allow something that would be done in secret as far as a gift, because again, it might cloud the judgment and the ruling that you give. Judges would be the same way. Well, here they were taking bribes. That's really what it all boils down to. They were taking bribes so that they would rule in someone's favor. Okay, Carl.
Jason probably knows. How long does it have to be for a pilot not to have alcohol before he can fly?
12 hours in the military.
12 hours in the military?
From longer before all this, from the time you have alcohol to the time you push the tire for takeoff is 12 hours.
12 hours to get the alcohol out of the system.
It's been well proven that the after effects go way beyond that.
Yeah. I was thinking for commercial pilots it was 24, but I don't know that that's for certain. But there is a time element between that drink of alcohol and before the time that you can fly.
It's like all these politicians. They know where they get their bread from. It's a fact.
Well, that's the problem. A lot of times they do treat people differently because of the amount of money that they have or what they can receive. And that's what the law of Moses, one of the things it was forbidding. Turn over to Exodus 23 and verses 7 and verse 8. Someone read those verses for us. Exodus 23, 7 and 8.
Keep thee far from a false matter, and the innocent of the righteous slay thou not. For I will not justify the wicked. And thou shalt take no gift, for the gift bindeth the wise, and perverteth the words of the righteous.
Okay. Thou shalt take no gift. Why? Why not? Because it blinds the eyes, blindeth the wise, perverts the words of the righteous. The gift has the power to change the ruling that you would give. He repeats this in Deuteronomy 16. A bribe. Well, that's what it is, but it's a gift. I personally like gift better because it becomes a bribe, or it is a bribe, but it's a gift that you're giving. In Deuteronomy 16, verses 18 and 19, he states, Judges and officers shalt thou make thee in all thy gates, which the Lord thy God giveth thee throughout thy tribes, and thou shalt judge the people with just judgment. Thou shalt not wrest judgment, thou shalt not respect persons, neither take a gift, for a gift doth blind the eyes of the wise and pervert the words of the righteous. So he again emphasizes the same thing, basically says the same thing in relationship. The gift, bribe, perverts the righteous. He's not going to do and judge rightly because of the money or the gift that he's receiving, the bribe that he's getting. And thou shalt have no respect to persons. When you're dealing with the law and individuals, you should be blind to the individuals, and here's the action, here's the law, how does it apply? Doesn't matter who it is, but we all know that's not the case as far as what happens from a realistic standpoint. We look at the individual. And we make judgments so many times based upon appearances in regards to those matters. But here, there's the alcohol mixing with the bribes that's taking place, and thus a woe that is placed upon them.
Solomon even warned the kings that they're not to have strong drink, but princes are strong drink.
Yeah.
Because
It will affect their judgment. Another class, since we're talking about alcohol in regards to that, not only prince and judges, but the priest were not to drink alcohol. Now, a quick question. Who are the priests of God today? All Christians. If priests were not to drink alcohol, then wouldn't that mean that we as Christians would not be allowed to drink alcohol? It would seem so, wouldn't it? If we're dealing with that typology from the Old Testament to the New Testament. But that's another study. Okay, verses 24 through 30. There is then the threat of captivity in this section. It's a general desolation and invading nations that he's going to deal with. He says, "Therefore, as the fire devoureth the stubble, and the flame consumeth the chaff, so their root shall be as rottenness, and their blossom shall go up as dust, because they have cast away the law of the Lord of hosts, and despised the word of the Holy One of Israel. Therefore is the anger of the Lord kindled against his people, and he hath stretched forth his hand against them, and hath smitten them, and the hills did tremble, and their carcasses were torn in the midst of the streets. For all his anger is not turned away, but his hand is stretched out still. And he will lift up an ensign to the nations from far, and will hiss unto them from the end of the earth. And behold, they shall come with speed swiftly. None shall be weary nor stumble among them. None shall slumber nor sleep. Neither shall the girdle of their loins be loosed, nor the latchet of their shoes be broken. Whose arrows are sharp, and all their bows bent. Their horses' hoofs shall be counted like flint, and their wheels like a whirlwind. Their roaring shall be like a lion. They shall roar like young lions. Yea, they shall roar and lay hold of the prey, and shall carry it away safe, and none shall deliver it. And in that day they shall roar against them like the roaring of sea. And if one look into the land, behold, darkness and sorrow, and the light is darkened in the heavens thereof." So, this, what?
not a very loving God.
You would think not, and if you were just reading this, because this is rather a strong rebuke, and they're going away into captivity. They're going to be destroyed. There's going to be desolation. Well, after reading all of these things in chapter 5 and all of these woes, that's what it is now. It is God executing judgment upon the Israelites because of their wickedness and sins. In verse 24, "Therefore as the fire devoureth the stubble, and the flame consumeth the chaff, so their root shall be as rottenness, and their blossom shall go up as dust, because they have cast away the law of the Lord of hosts, and despised the word of the Holy One of Israel." The stubble here is basically dried grass or hay. Burns quickly. It's devoured quickly by fire. The blossom and root would be the outward manifestation and the inner source of prosperity. Well, it's going to turn to dust and rot. Someone turn over to Proverbs 13 and read verse 15 for us. Proverbs 13 and verse 15. Okay, the last phrase there, the way of the transgressor is hard. Well, he has enumerated the transgressor in the previous verses. Now then, we're seeing the hardness in regards to that it's coming upon them. They're going to be destroyed. Like dried grass that's burned up real quickly by the fire, devoured. Their outward and inner source of prosperity is turned to dust or rot. Way of the transgressor's hard. Now then, he gives the reason. It's because of the rejection of God and His Word. And because of that rejection of God and His Word, God's going to bring this destruction upon them. Now then, as we read and went through those previous verses, we started this evening even with, it sounds so much like United States of America, doesn't it? And all of the things that he describes. God, because of those sins, and they had rejected God's word, going to destroy them. Would you say the United States of America has basically rejected God's word today? Totally? Well, what's going to happen to the United States of America? Now then, why is it still standing? That might be a good question to ask as well. He is patient. That is true. There's still a faithful remnant. If God would have spared Sodom and Gomorrah, and some say that there were 1 million to 1.5 million people in those cities, in that area, if he would have spared those cities for 10 righteous souls, how many righteous souls is he sparing the United States because of? Don't know how many people perished in the flood, but there were obviously a lot of people, and only 8 souls were saved. Of the millions that came out of Egypt, how many went into the land of promise? 2. I think of the passage in Luke, strive to enter. We talk about in the Sermon on the Mount, and Jesus talking about the broad way that leads to destruction. Many there be that go in there yet. Few there be that find the straight way that leads to life. Who was he talking to then? No, he wasn't. He wasn't talking to the apostles. No. It's a Sermon on the Mount. Who was he speaking to? The Jews, the children of God. Now, the children of God, that's what he says about them. In other words, the majority of those children of God are going to be lost. Should that make us think a little bit? Someone, and I don't remember who the preacher was, somebody asked him, you think y'all are the only ones going to heaven? And his response was, I'm a whole lot narrower-minded than that. I don't think many of us are going to heaven. And I tend to agree with him. I wish I could remember who it was that had that comeback, but we need to be careful in relationship to what we do as Christians as well. In verse 25 then, therefore is the anger of the Lord kindled against his people, and he has stretched forth his hand against them, and hath smitten them, and the hills did tremble, and their carcasses were torn in the midst of the streets. For his anger is not turned away, but his hand is stretched out still. Because of their rejection of God's word and rejection of God, God's anger is against his people. Does God get angry? Is it wrong for us to get angry? No. Okay, the first, yes. The answer to the second is no. Would it be sinful for us not to get angry? Sometimes it would be. Why? If we're not angry over the same things that God gets angry over, then we sin. If we're supposed to have the divine nature and God gets angry over this action, whatever action it might be, and he gets angry over it, then if I'm not angry over that same action, how can I have the divine nature? How can I have the mind of God if I don't get angry over the things that he gets angry at? God says he's angry here. He's angry with the people because they've rejected him. And now then, he's going to be stretching out his hand against them. Before, his hand had been stretched out to bless them. Now then, it's going to be to smite them, to destroy them, to punish them. However you might want to express it, it's against them as opposed to being for them. He talks about the mountains tremble or shake as in God's awesome presence. Some think this has a reference to the earthquake that was in the days of Uzziah. It's mentioned in Amos 1 and verse 1. And Andrew, how rude of you to ring the bell just then. Where it says the words of Amos, who was among the herdsmen of Tekoa, which he saw concerning Israel in the days of Uzziah, king of Judah, and in the days of Jeroboam, the son of Joash, king of Israel, 2 years before the earthquake. And so some have the idea that the mountain shaking here has reference to that earthquake. And that earthquake's also mentioned in Zechariah 14 and verse 5, same one. Well, since Andrew rang the second bell, we'll go ahead and stop there.